Well, greetings. Welcome to the Dividing Line. I've already done a program today. I just recorded a Sheologians webcast. Haven't been on Summer's program for a while, and we just did a program that will drop right before Christmas. We were contemplating how different could things be on December 23rd. We don't know who's going to win the election, if the country will be in the state of civil war. Who knows? I'm just going to say it again. I don't know that Donald J. Trump will be alive for the election. I just don't. Sorry, when we've had as many attempts as we've had, and we'll see. It's all in the Lord's hands, but wow, what a world we live in today. I remembered my hearing aids today. I had forgotten them in the last program, and everything sounded very muddy. It's very so anyway, here we are. Did a deep dive, went down the rabbit hole on Twitter again over the past couple of days. And you know, that can be a depressing, almost frightening thing to do. And it is amazing when people develop a bias, when they develop a prejudice or a hatred, it's amazing what they can end up thinking you've said or attributing to you. It truly is. And there is a fellow out there on Twitter at Defiant Baptist. Now, you would think we're all Baptists, right? Well, no. Defiant Baptist, he put up a clip from 2 programs ago and made some comment that, you know, so often they do the feigned shock thing, but they don't go into details, because if you go into details, that requires work, and then you can be refuted, and you have to do your homework, and if you don't know what you're talking about, then you're in real trouble. And I had said to him, do you have anything other than feigned shock to actually say to what I said? And his response was, I didn't feign anything, Mr. White. What you said in the clip and the rest of the episode was shocking, especially coming from a Calvinist. Do you honestly believe that rebel sinners require persecution in order to hate Jesus Christ? Would the Jews only despise the Messiah a little bit if Christians had been nicer to them? Finally, as my brother JD demonstrates, your entire argument is anachronistic. So what are we talking about here? Well, first of all, let me just say, Steadfast Baptist doesn't have a clue what he's talking about. Okay? Here's the point. Ooh, right over that. Has no earthly idea. And it makes me wonder, because anyone who knows anything about church history, anyone who has listened to this program more than 5 times, shouldn't have this problem. So where's this filter coming from? Where's this bias, this I'm going to completely miss the most obvious stuff coming from? And that sort of depends, because it was following those links that I then encountered the real ugly stuff we're going to look at a little bit later on. But let me play for you. This is 90 seconds. This is the clip from 2 programs ago. I can remember because I remember which T-shirt I was wearing. And this is what he hears me saying, is that the only reason that there is any Jewish hatred of Christianity is because how Christians treated Jews. Now, let me just stop for just a moment and go, I've been teaching the New Testament. Well, this ministry has been around 41 years. We have dealt with, for example, Acts chapter 4, and that particular text in regards to Reformed theology. Because remember, he even said, especially coming from a Calvinist. I don't know if he's a Calvinist or an anti-Calvinist. I have no earthly idea. But we have talked about how in God's foreordained decree, Herod, Pontius Pilate, the Romans and the Jews were used by God in the crucifixion of Christ. We have talked repeatedly about the encounters and exchanges between Jesus and the Pharisees, the Sadducees, the differing perspectives they had. We have, I don't know how many hours we have spent on that. We have discussed Jewish persecution of the early church, the men who took the oath to kill Paul, who must have starved to death that kept their oath. We've talked about all this, and then in addressing church history, I have said more than once that early on you had the division between the church and the synagogue. We've even addressed, I remember at one point we addressed the historical question. You know, a lot of people will attack John's historiography because he says that the Jews had determined to put anyone out of the synagogue who would confess Jesus as Messiah. And there are certain commentaries and scholars who would say that took place much later, and so this demonstrates that John is not really being historical, and he's writing this at a later time, maybe even 2nd century. We've addressed all this stuff before. And I have talked about the fact that the division between the synagogue and the church, rather inevitable in light of the synagogue's rejection of Jesus as Messiah, had impact. So, for example, there are very few people who had a major impact in church history, in the early church history, who could read Hebrew. And that inability, that early division to where the ability to read the Tanakh, the Torah, the Nevi'im, the Ketuvim, in the original languages, you only had Jerome and Origen, basically. And that had a huge impact. You can't interpret Hebrews, for example, if you don't have the Old Testament background. And that meant a lot of people were limited only to the Greek scriptures, to the Greek Septuagint, things like that. And this had an impact on many things. And then once pretty much you can find, sadly, anti-Jewish sentiment being expressed in some of the, what I would call, lesser apostolic fathers. So there's elements, the early elements of an anti-Jewish polemic you'll pick up in phrases in Shepherd of Hermas, Epistle Barnabas. It's muted. It's not to what it's going to get eventually. But you can start seeing that now that division is there, warnings such as Romans 11, don't boast yourself against the branches have been cut off, and that kind of stuff gets ignored. And you start seeing this, what you're eventually going to see become just a horrific anti-Jewish mindset that will lead to horrible things once you get farther down into church history. And then once you have the peace of the church in 313, you have the Council of Nicaea, you have Constantinianism, this starts to develop more fully. And it's never fully universal. I mean, there might be some periods during the medieval time where you just get, it almost looks like it's universal. Nobody raised a huge stink when during the Black Death, some cities would take all their Jews, put them in a farmhouse on a island, lock the doors and burn the whole thing down to try to get rid of the plague because the Jews were causing the plague. See, you're not going to see a whole lot of major complaints about that. Even during the Crusades, some of the Crusaders go off and ransack Jewish communities and kill people, but then there would be complaints about that, and some prelates tried to protect the Jews from some of the Crusaders, and so it got nigh unto universal in some situations, but it got incredibly ugly down the road. And even in some of the greatest writings you'll see, John Chrysostom, I mean, look at what Calvin, he wanted to write a commentary on Chrysostom's sermons, but never got around to it. He wrote the introduction, very interesting and helpful introduction, just never got around to writing the book. And he speaks highly of John the Golden Mouth, but you'll find anti-Jewish stuff in him, and then of course we've talked over and over again about what happened with Luther. You can go online, you can see the lecture I gave on Reformation Day in 2017 in Washington D.C. The two Luthers, and I'm talking about Jesus was a Jew prior to 1525 and openness to evangelism of the Jews and stuff like that. And then the Peasants' Revolt takes place in 1525, and after that, I remember sitting in the church in Eisleben, where he was born and died. He didn't really live there almost any period of time at all, but he was born in Eisleben, died in Eisleben. And I was sitting right next to where one of the pulpits, goes up around the pillar of the church there, and listening to a lecture about those final sermons that he did there. He had gone there to try to bring some unity between some Reformed parties, Reformation parties that were warring with one another. And he preached just a horrific anti-Jewish sermon while he was there. And so I just remember looking up at that pulpit and thinking about what that would have been like to be sitting there and hearing that kind of thing coming from someone who, in many other instances, could speak so brilliantly of the grace of God. So we have talked about this subject on this program. Have you counted how many dividing lines do we have up there now? Have we hit 3,000 yet? I haven't looked since we were on 2,500. I'm not sure if we're there yet or not, but there are thousands and thousands of hours. My church history lectures are online. They're on YouTube. There just isn't any excuse for this kind of stupidity. There just isn't. I'm sorry. I don't have any respect for it. I'm not gonna play games. I'm not gonna try to be nicey. If you're going to post clips like this and demonstrate you don't have a clue what you're talking about, I'm going to tell everybody you don't have a clue what you're talking about. That's just all there is to it. Because this stuff's vile. And since this is being used by people to promote that vile stuff, I'm going to deal with it. So here's the clip. Here's what I said. And just, by the way, just to give you an idea, a guy named Jason Dixon at Kinnisman on Twitter. Yeah, I'm naming names. If you're gonna say stuff about me, I got a big audience. I'll talk about you. At Kinnisman, Jason Dixon said, James White has gone right over the edge of sanity. This is what happens when infected by the alienist mind virus. We're all learning new words. So now there's the alienist mind virus. And then guy we're going to be looking at later on, Gustav. At Gustav 7744187754. Someone said you should never respond to anyone who has more than four numbers in their ID, but he has a bunch of them. So Gustav, who I believe is German, because he posts in both English and German, and most Germans are able to do that. He responded to what Jason Dixon said by saying, we're at the point where it is safe to assume that Jude White, I've told you, people have photoshopped my face onto Jewish rabbis and stuff like that. Jude White is possessed or heavily demonically oppressed. For the sake of our souls, we ought to avoid him entirely. Well, I'll tell you what, Gustav, I'm telling everybody else, you need to be avoided entirely. Okay? Because he also says later on, Rabbi Jude White's attacks on Roman Catholicism were simply a thinly veiled attack on Christianity. Okay? He then says, Jude White is so blasphemous he needs to be behind a gore warning. And then some guy named American Quintillion, at a Quintillion, responded, it's truly a sight to see. He should just become a Messianic Jew at this point. Okay. Look, I realize every single person I've quoted here, utterly irrational. There's nothing going on here. I get it. But these people, oh, look at this. Let me look. He is a Calvinist. Interesting. Well, you're the worst Calvinist I've ever met. Here's something else. In fact, I can't pull it over here because I maximized the screen. Let me, hold on a second here. Here's something else that Gustav posted. If you'd like to put that up. Well, you can't read the, if you don't go full bore. Here's Gustav. Notice the numbers, 1483, 1933. So 1483 is when Luther's born. And 1933, the rise of Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party. And in Fraktur, I had to ask my German friends for some help here because one of the Fraktur capital forms I just couldn't figure out. It didn't make sense to me. But what it says is Hitler's battle and Luther's teachings are the good defense of the German people. Now, of course, it's Hitler's Kampf und Luther's Lehre des deutschen Volkes gute Wehr. So it actually in German rhymes, doesn't so much in translation, which obviously happens a lot. So this is our Gustav. He's a Nazi. I mean, that's what else are you gonna call someone who posts something like that? What other term is there? Then he is a Nazi. So clearly, though, he claims to be a Christian Nazi. That's what we've got going on here. So here's the clip that insane, oppressed, demonized, alienist mind virus, shocking coming from a Calvinist, all the rest of this stuff. Here's the clip. The history of Christian persecution of Jews is sad. It really is. It can't be denied. Shouldn't be denied. It's just everywhere. And again, it was sacralism. That was very much a part of that. Were there sacralists? Were there Roman Catholics who tried to protect Jews, like from the Crusaders? Okay, and by the way, obviously, I'm talking here about the Middle Ages because you don't have sacralism in the primitive church or before Constantine or stuff like that. So I was talking about that particular thing. Yes, there were. Unfortunately, they were normally in the minority, not in the majority. But yeah, bad stuff happened in history, and that's a reality. The result of that is that Talmudic Judaism developed a deep detestation for Jesus. It's very clear that the Muslim view of Jesus is much higher than the Talmudic Jewish view. I mean, Jesus isn't even at the top level when Muhammad visits heaven, but he's at least considered a prophet, and he's at least up in a level of heaven, whereas Judaism, no. So evidently what certain rather daft people came up with was that, oh, what he's saying is that up until Christians started persecuting Jews, that everybody with flowers and hugs and everything, and it was only because the mean Christians persecuted the Jews that they started not liking Jesus. How do you do that? How do you even, I don't know. I don't know. And the number of people that believe it, the prejudice, the bias, the filters going, it's just so absurd. It's hard to even know how someone, well, we have people voting for Kamala Harris, so I guess it's just a day of insanity everywhere. But it's going on here too. Look, here's the point. The division had taken place long before. And Talmudic Judaism, well, let's talk a little bit about two things. I grabbed a couple of volumes from my library, and I can pretty much guarantee you these folks don't have these volumes in their library because don't do that kind of thing. I've had these for years. A couple of volumes from the Mishnah. Okay? The Mishnah. Now, what's the Mishnah? Why should you care what the Mishnah is? The Mishnah was collected in the centuries after the time of Christ. Pretty much comes together by about 250. So you're talking, prior to the Council of Nicaea, but this is amongst the Jews. And of course, this is after the destruction of Jerusalem, after the Council of Jamnia. There's, it's a difficult time for Judaism, given what has happened with the Romans and all that. So what makes the Mishnah particularly important for New Testament scholars is that it's the closest contemporary collection we have of the traditions of the Jews that are referred to in the New Testament all the time. Now, you can't just assume that the Mishnah is identical to the traditions that were held by the scribes and Pharisees at the time of Jesus. But we can tell that there is a tremendous amount of overlap, that in many instances, that's what you've got going on here. This gives us, so the Mishnah records for us the Korban rule. And, we're given that specific term. I think it was Mark that gave it to us, but Matthew, Mark record Jesus is going after the Korban rule and saying you invalidate the word of God by your traditions. And so we can find that in the Mishnah. And so it's extremely valuable in giving, all the insights you can get as to the context of not only Roman culture and time, in that time period, but man, Jewish traditions, extremely, extremely useful. Very, very helpful in being able to do that. So what happens is you get the Mishnah. So you're talking 2.5 centuries after the birth of Christ. And then you start getting commentary being written on the Mishnah. So you have various of the rabbis, and the Mishnah gives credence to the idea that there are unwritten traditions that were passed down outside of Scripture from Moses down to the rabbis of that day. Sounds familiar. And so other rabbis now start commenting on the content of the Mishnah. And so what eventually happens, about 700 years after the time of Christ, is you get the Talmud coming together. Now, there's sort of different versions that didn't happen over. It's not like we'd like to be able to say on October 17th. It doesn't work that way, especially in the ancient world. These are a couple volumes from the Soncino Talmud. You've got the Babylonian Talmud, and some of the critical editions will give you variations and differences. This set is 22 volumes long. It's been in my library for many, many years. I don't know how in the world to be paid for it, because I got it when I was in seminary. I took classes on Midrash, and why? Because in doing apologetics, having background information for the New Testament is vital to be able to defend the biblical text from people who are trying to decontextualize it and attack it on that basis. And so I spent a lot more time than most seminary students did looking at the Jewish documentation and Jewish material. So when you take what develops after the Mishnah is called the Gemara, the sayings. It is interpretation of the Mishnah. You put the Mishnah and Gemara together, you have the Talmud. Significantly longer, fuller than the Mishnah, of course. Then the Talmud becomes the foundation for the development of the religious system that we call Talmudic Judaism today. And sadly, in most instances, the teaching and content of the Talmud has significantly greater weight in the formulation of that religious system than the scriptures do at all. Again, we can draw parallels to many other situations. It's happened with Roman Catholicism and their traditions and their canon law and all the rest of that stuff. It's happened in Islam. The Sunnis have their body of hadith. The Shiites have theirs. It just seems to be a common element of man's religions that this kind of thing is going to be taking place. And so once you have the Talmud in existence, then you begin to develop Talmudic Judaism. And this is now 700, 1,000, and farther after the time of Christ. And so, sadly, persecutions have already begun. Now, that means that the interpretation of these documents is going to be more and more and more biased. They're going to see in these documents more and more that is opposed to what they understand to be the Christian faith. That's one of the problems here, is there's a lot of misunderstanding of the Christian faith, just like there's a tremendous amount of misunderstanding of the Christian faith amongst Muslims. And hey, when you've got Crusader armies coming, and the Crusaders are ignorant of Islam, and the Muslims are ignorant of Christianity, the chances that either side is going to be overly concerned about having accurate knowledge about the other side is very, very little. And what that ends up doing is leading to even more misrepresentation, even more straw man, and less possibility of any type of serious conversation as to conversion or anything like that. Almost all the conversions for a long period of time are forced conversions or conversions of political context. You're holed up in a city, the city comes under siege, and one of the options given to you is to convert to the other side's religion. And Christians did that to Islam, Muslims did that to Christianity. Obviously, I would say that from an Islamic perspective, they can't complain about that. That's from Muhammad's viewpoint. If you say the Shahada, they can't question the sincerity of that. And you need to be treated as a Muslim. From the Christian perspective, we're just like, we should be, if we're biblical in our understanding of things, we should be going, that's not how you get converts. But that's one of the problems. That's why you needed the Reformation. to take place. So the persecution of Jews by Christians is not a questionable reality. It took place. It happened. I hate seeing that there. We need to zoom that in somehow. It's just put it someplace else. It's just too wide. I don't. You can see way too much there. Yeah, well, it's just too many wires and stuff there. Anyways, the persecution of Jews by Christians is a historical reality. If you try to deny that, you're just a flat earther, okay? And I don't have any respect for flat earthers. Are you trying to zoom in? This. I suppose this is supposed to be something like customer service, but anyways. So, but yeah. See, now I can do this and cut my head off. So that's not going to work. Anyway. See what I put up with. See. What was I talking about? Moses was in the bulrushes. Yes. Thanks, Rich. Quit playing around with the cameras now, and put them back. And yeah, quit putting the screen up while you're at it. Okay. The Jewish persecution of Christians in the early church is a historical reality. You can't read the book of Acts. You can't read 2 Thessalonians. It's there. I've even pointed out to folks that after the Holocaust and after World War II, there was a tremendous embarrassment in primarily German and European New Testament scholarship about some of the things Paul said about the Jews. I've told the story how many times of when the Passion movie came out, how they had to take out, they didn't take it out, they took out the subtitling, where the Jews say, his blood be upon us and upon our children. They still said it in Aramaic, but they just took out the subtitling because you just can't quote that. Matthew, you should never, that's terrible. No, you cannot avoid what the New Testament says. There was persecution by the Jewish leadership, not by every single Jew, but by the Jewish leadership of Christians in the early years. There's no question about it. But Christians have their own scriptures telling them, don't boast against those broken off branches. One body. We have the book of Ephesians. There was no excuse ever for someone holding this book in their hand to do what they did. Ever. Stop pretending you believe this if you think that there was. Okay? Just get rid of it. Okay? So, it's like we can look at the terrible things that Muslims did to Christians. I've been reading thousands of pages on the Crusades over the past couple of months now. Thousands of pages, including stuff by people who are clearly apologists for the Crusades. And what's missing in all of it is we are held to a different standard. Yes, Muslims have done horrific things to Christians down through the years. And we don't have the right to become hateful as a result. Not if you read Jesus. Not if you read Paul. Not if you read that New Testament. You don't have that right. Can't do it. Can't do it. And so Jews did terrible things to Christians in the early period. They persecuted people. I mean, Paul's a Jew, going and killing people. That is not an excuse to do the same thing. They did it to us, we're going to do it to them. Nope, doesn't work that way. Doesn't work that way. And in fact, if our goal is to bring the gospel to these people, if you can sit there and go, all I don't see there's any really command to bring the gospel to the Muslims or the Jews. Again, just quit playing the religion thing. You're not a Christian. You don't believe the Bible. Stop it. Just quit. You're a hypocrite. And you're bringing disrepute upon Christianity. Stop it. If you literally sit there and say, we're under we don't need to worry about, loving Muslims or opening the door for communication and those Jews, they've just been cast off, so we don't. I'm sorry, I'm not going to have anything to do with you. And there's a real good example of what a church has to be able to go. If you have someone in your church who says that there are people that you should not bring the gospel to, they don't belong in your church. They don't believe the gospel. They don't believe the gospel. Stop it. This was all completely inarguable. It wasn't even controversial just a few years ago. I just can't believe I'm sitting here having to talk about this stuff. Really am. But that's where we are. That's where we are. So, anyway, there's some background to how just some of the factors that led into Talmudic Judaism having, as I said in the clip, a lower view of Jesus. I mean, they have the scriptures in their hands, but they have a lower view of Jesus than the Muslims have. That's sad. It's based on prejudice and bias and ignorance and, sadly, centuries and centuries, not only of Christian, quote-unquote Christian, I mean people wearing a cross who didn't know the gospel. They didn't know the gospel. That's the point. Persecuting Jews, killing Jews, and then that becomes amplified over and over and over again. Okay? Now, if you want to call that blasphemous, that I should become a Messianic Jew, that's the American quintillion dolt. Right over the edge of insanity, infection by the alienist mind virus. Not a one of you could stand in a public debate and do anything other than drool on yourself if we tried to debate this. You couldn't. You couldn't, and you know it. So, like I said, I do this, go down this rabbit hole. And I wish that this stuff was not an actual threat to the church. I really wish that it wasn't. But do you remember this epistle that found in the New Testament called Galatians? Remember that? It's not the most popular. It's not politically correct at all. But in Galatians, Paul, who was just clearly off his rocker at this point, right? I mean, he's just being so bombastic and he's anathematizing people and, oh man, just not loving at all. Just so arrogant and prideful and, it's just terrible. That's pretty much how Barry Lynn characterized it in our debate, a quarter of a century ago. He is talking about, he's writing this epistle and he's writing it in his own hand. So he knows it's going to be read in the church. The church is going to gather for worship and this is going to be read. And the people he's talking about are going to be sitting in the congregation. Now, they don't have church buildings back then. It would be large houses or maybe out in a field someplace or something. And he describes these people who are wishing to distort, to twist, not to deny, but to twist the gospel. The term he uses is like, and I've had this happen more than once, you get a lock that gets hard and difficult, or here in Arizona during the monsoon season, which we sort of skipped this year, It's just decided to become super hot forever. Here, we're never going to cool down here. 15 days of record highs in a row. 15 days. I mean, it's just a blocking high that's just parked there and it's doesn't want to move. When it does, we're going to get, it's all of a sudden, we're going to be freezing to death. But sometimes when doors here in Phoenix they're normally dry, so they were aligned to open and close while it's dry. Well, you get a few weeks of moisture in, and they suck up some of that moisture because they're dry, and they swell. And so you'll get locks that'll become next to impossible to turn. And you've got to be careful. You turn that key hard enough, and those keys are meant to be, they can't be the hardest thing on the planet. And you'll twist them to where they'll become unusable. That's the term that Paul's using. They want to twist the gospel. They want to change it just enough to where it becomes something else. Because he says it's not another gospel, it's a false gospel. What term does he use to describe these people? Pseudadelphoi. Pseudadelphoi. False brothers. False brothers. Now, why would he even have to say that? Because they look just like us. They come into the congregation. They act like they're a part of the congregation. They use our words. They sing our songs. They profess to be followers of Jesus. As far as we can tell from Galatians, they didn't deny other central doctrines like the resurrection or the deity of Christ or ascension to heaven, anything like that. They changed the gospel just a little bit. And he calls them pseudadelphoi. And what's the term he uses to describe them? They snuck in. They snuck in. They didn't have a band announcing them, here comes the false teachers. We've come to bring you a new message. No, they snuck in. They were devious. They snuck in. And that's what we're seeing happening. Is we have groups and people out there that are seeking to sneak into the church destructive, divisive ideas. In this case, full-on, full-blown Nazism. I mean, this Gustav, he's a Nazi. You don't post the swastika with Luther and talk about Hitler's work. That's what makes you a Nazi, for crying out loud. That's the definition. Okay? They're trying to sneak in. They're trying to poison minds. And they're taking advantage of the fact that we're living in a day when the West is collapsing. The West is collapsing. We have embraced our own self-destruction. God's bringing judgment upon the West. We have so much blood dripping from our fingers that to even try to profess innocence is just ridiculous. And so they're taking advantage of the timing. And there's all sorts of people they're looking around, grabbing on something because nothing seems certain anymore. And so let's ask questions about everything. Now, these folks aren't asking questions. Gustav's not asking questions. He's making assertions. But those that are asking questions, they're more than happy to say, hey, we'll give you answers. Doesn't seem I'm the only one that's run into these folks. Were you going to?
I wanted to join in here just a little bit because when I hear that last part of that talking about you might as well be a Messianic Jew, I don't understand it. As you know, I've been teaching through the book of Acts in my church, and this last time around, it really impacted me, the significance of what happened in Acts chapter 2. We want to argue verse 38. We want to argue about the Holy Spirit coming. But the first confrontation in Solomon's portico is an exchange where Peter lays it out cold to the masses. There's thousands of people present. They're Jews, every one of them. And he lays it out for them, and they go, they're pierced to the heart. They realize what they've done. And they ask him, what should we do? What are we supposed to do now? He doesn't condemn them like these guys seem to.
Yeah.
He says, repent. And what did they do?
Because the promise is for you and your children, the Jews, and for all those the Lord our God shall call the Gentiles. Yeah, we just want to make sure, because some people's Bibles have a different version.
Yeah, it's like they got the X-Acto knife and they took that part out.
Yeah.
But I don't understand, because that first wave of conversions were Messianic Jews. It's just, I don't understand this. These people repented.
Hey, I've seen, a month and a half ago, when that thing happened with the guy who had been at Apologia, he went to another church.
Right.
It was in that, going down that rabbit hole, that I saw someone saying, well, once Jew, always Jew. They do not believe the gospel, because do not believe the gospel can change anyone's heart.
No distinction there. And what I don't understand is that where the conflict starts is when they get dragged before the Sanhedrin. And when you look at what Stephen charged them with, what Peter charged them with, it's, you guys sit in the place of the rulers that came before you, who killed the prophets. You're the same. And he preached to them, and their response to Stephen is the perfect example. They haul Stephen out and they stone him to death. But the distinction between the rulers and the people.
Yeah. Well, Jesus made that distinction.
There's no distinction
in Matthew 23.
Yeah, exactly. Yes.
Matthew 23. How often would I have gathered your chicks?
Yep.
But you would not. They don't see the distinction.
And because we've covered it so often, when I covered that passage, I went right there, because it's like, hey, you've got to make the distinction. Jesus made it in Matthew 23. It's made here by Luke in numerous, 3 different places, as the interaction between the people and the Sanhedrin happens. I just don't understand how these guys cannot possibly see the distinction that's there.
They don't want to, because their hearts are filled with hate. I wanted to make sure, before I forget this, I'm going to go to a tweet thread here for a second. I want to make sure I got this. This Defiant Baptist, is Defiant Baptist still around? Okay. Put this up. He said on this tweet, finally, as my brother JD demonstrates, your entire argument is anachronistic. And what did JD say? Quote, even the best of the Gentiles should be killed. Avodah Zarah 26b, which I assume is probably from the Talmud, from the Mishnah. I'd have to look it up. That was written about 1,400 years before the Holocaust, about 1,100 years before their mass deportations in the West began, and 600 years before any persecution in Europe. Okay, you, again, have to be daft. Okay, you have to not be listening, to lack the capacity to do logical thought. To think that what I was saying is there was never any dispute between Christians and Jews until the Christians started persecuting Jews, which they started doing, sadly, shortly, maybe contemporaneously with, but shortly after the formulation of the Mishnah. So my entire argument is not anachronistic. Your ignorance of my argument, misrepresentation of my argument, whatever else it might be, is just silly, foolish, and embarrassing. But what I said was not in any way anachronistic. So what I wanted to do is Doug Wilson. It seems Doug's running into the same people that I am, for the same reasons that I am. And I thought he put out a fascinating thread. Did you read it? No, okay. Yeah. Fascinating thread on today, what was it? 7:30 this morning. Here's what I'm going to have to read it for you, because I'm actually reading it from Twitter. I recently wrote disparagingly about revoice for Nazis. Now, okay, you got to explain, Doug sort of assumes certain background issues. Revoice was the Presbyterian attempt to mainstream homosexuality into the PCA. And one of the terms that sort of came out of that time period is that of side B Christianity. So if you want to see what that's all about, see the debate that I did with Greg, somebody, about a year and a half or so ago, where we dealt with that particular issue. He being a proponent of that idea. The idea being that the desire is not sinful. The orientation is not sinful. God can actually make you homosexual. But the act is the only thing that would be sinful. And so here's, Pastor Gabe says you should post a link. A link to what? A link to Doug's thing? Just go to Douglas Wills and probably the last thing he posted. Anyway, if he's listening right now, I'm not sure, but he may be talking about a link to the program, which I should have a link. I'm not even sure how to do. I don't even know how to link to the program on Twitter. When I say that it's about to start, I always used to put the YouTube thing on it. Now I don't know how to do that because we're on Twitter instead of YouTube. You'll show me? Okay. We'll fix that in the future. All right, back to Douglas Wilson. I recently wrote disparagingly about, maybe disparagingly too, about revoice for Nazis. What was that about? What am I going on about now? Not counting the FBI bots, there has certainly been a recent upsurge in what might be called online side B Nazis. That's why I just explained side B. Okay, side B Christians would say you can't engage in homosexuality, but you can have the desires of a homosexual. So, not counting the FBI bots, there has certainly been a recent upsurge in what might be called online side B Nazis. Not entirely on board with death camp extremes, but certainly sympathetic to the claim that the Jews were being a problem. And maybe the whole death camp thing was exaggerated anyhow. Others, not of this mind, but very aware of how badgered young white men could have gotten to such a dark place, have wanted to win them back by being, winsome, understanding, not harsh. This is structurally how the whole revoice thing was pitched to us. It is identical. Kid grows up in the church, suffocated by, pick one, purity culture, 2, post-war liberal consensus, and that is why I felt I had to leave the church. These lost boys are thought to be winnable because they are willing to reject actual same-sex behavior, or, if we are talking about this new round of revoice, actual death camps. In both instances, they're willing to reject overt sin, but for some reason want to remain sin adjacent. They don't want to have sex, but they do want to cuddle. Those who want to reach them are sympathetic because they know that many of them really were treated horribly by their parents, their home churches, or by the broader culture. Some are ostracized for being effeminate. Others were abused for being too white, and both went to a dark place with it. At the same time, let it be emphasized, many others were not treated horribly at all, but quickly took to the victim game with a Me Too epistemology, claiming that their parents, home churches, etc., had really worked them over. What their parents and churches had actually sought to do was provide simple biblical accountability, which was, in these therapeutic times, interpreted as harshness. The Christian faith is a serious and demanding faith, and those who would repent and come to Christ need to come with no conditions whatever. The effeminacy has to go. So does the Jew hate. And so naturally at this point, definitions are demanded of us. It is not Jew hate to question the official World War II narrative. That is quite true. I've been doing that for decades. Where does the Bible say that a feather boa is necessarily effeminate? You are quite right. It doesn't. But yours is. And the Jew... I cracked up when I read it the first time, too. You are quite right. It doesn't. But yours is. And the Jew hate that I am seeing in my comment threads, and believe you me, he gets it, and so am I, in my comment threads on this topic is at feather boa levels, if you catch my drift. Which we did. And you start reading the comments, and it's like clockwork. Hey, you just skewered me. I'm mad. And so they come out of the woodwork and come after you. What? That was a good analogy. You've got side B. Yeah, that's... So clearly, let's make Nazism great again. Yeah, that's what some people are definitely trying to do. So let me try to summarize this stuff. Like I said, I when I saw the clip being posted by Defiant Baptist, I said, I'm going to respond to this on the program, and I did by giving you a lot of background on Mishnah, Gemara, Talmud, the development of Talmudic Judaism, the reality of Christian hatred toward Jews, and sadly, vice versa. But the fact that we don't have the excuse. I suppose you could probably go to the minor prophet and say they didn't either. But I'm not a Jew, and so I'm not going to pretend to go there. What's going on should be of great concern to all shepherds of the flock, because all of our people have these. All of our people have them. And they're listening to things, they're hearing things, they have access to stuff, and there's just so much bad stuff out there. Obviously, we do the best we can at my church to provide in-depth, broad exhortation, preaching, to provide a basis, a foundation to stand on. But you still have people that become apathetic about the truth, and they start looking for other stuff. And you have to protect the flock. And these people are sneaking in, and they're using this to sneak in. This is their way in. And brothers, elders, there is no room for Nazism in the Christian faith. There is no room for hatred of people groups. Let me add, there is no room for hatred of Muslims in the Christian church either. But they do terrible things. They're persecuting Christians. Yes. And they're persecuting Christians in Paul's day. And what did he say? Pray for them. Pray for them. That's what he said. But that's not enough. Then you don't believe the scriptures. You don't believe in the sufficiency of scripture. You don't. Because the power of God that has been given to the church is the gospel. It's not your violence. It's not your ability to spread your message and get everybody together on the same page and feel like y'all are united. The problem is you may feel like you're united, but you're united in something that will rob you of your soul and will not give you peace. So we need to pray for the peace of our churches, for the protection of our churches. We need to pray for our shepherds that they will guide those churches. In fact, it's interesting. In fact, Rich mentioned it to him before the program started, and I had already seen it. This Gustav guy, he had gone after John Harris. I guess something that he wrote said something that John Harris is married to a Jew or something. And Joel Webben responded to him and said, stand down. You're going after someone who's on our side and is doing the right thing, and tried to talk him off the proverbial ledge. And what was the result? Now Joel Webben's a false teacher. Yep, that's right. Some of these folks, there is no reasoning. There's no, you can't go there. So they will take on anybody. And sadly destroy themselves in the process. Okay, so wow, the stuff we get to talk about. Yeah. Well, I would much rather be talking about more positive things, but you know what? Sometimes you have to sound the alarm and say, Christians, don't go there. Run. If you see this stuff coming into your church, make sure your elders know. Don't. And a lot of people got really angry at me when I mentioned a couple months ago the guy that showed up at Apologia and wanted to talk to one of the pastors. And I go out in the foyer, and I've been doing this a while. You know, when we got somebody coming in, clearly not a part of the church, and they're buttering you up. Oh, you guys do so much good stuff with the Mormons and on abortion and yeah, waiting for the other shoe to fall. But you just need to understand there's something behind all of this, and the one thing that makes it all make sense, it's the Jews. These folks are out there. And now that guy was like wearing a clown suit in the sense that, here comes false teacher, here I am. You know, it was obvious. You didn't need a whole lot of discernment to see that one coming. It's the ones that are very quiet about it. Hey, have you read this article? Hey, have you heard of Stone Choir? If you hear anyone making reference to Stone Choir, ding, 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 alarm bells immediately. Oh, but they've said some good stuff. So did Adolf Hitler. Okay? I mean, I've actually had people saying, well, you know, after World War I, if the victorious side hadn't treated Germany so badly, things would have been different. And I'm like, no, duh. Yeah, that's right. If Germany had been allowed to rebuild its economy and function amongst the rest of the nations, there wouldn't have been the fertile field for Adolf Hitler and his Nazis. I agree. Of course. So what? What does that have to do with anything? Oh, it's the Jews. Okay, there you go. It just takes a little while to get past it. Just be careful. Just be careful, folks. There you go. All right, thank you for, here we go. Tom Askell just tweeted. Well, actually, it says 12 hours ago. Oh, okay. I'm not sure why it just popped up. Thank you for praying. God protected and is providing for us. Water rose fast, but never got close to entering our house. We were flooded in. No electricity. Trees down, damaged. Church, family, mostly good. Many others suffering. Our Lord reigns. Well, yeah. That was a big storm. That was a big storm. I haven't seen a whole lot of reporting yet on it's like they can't get in there or something. I don't know, but I haven't seen a whole lot. Hopefully we'll get some more information, but we continue to pray for Tom and the church there and all the folks that have been deeply impacted by Hurricane Milton, one of the worst named hurricanes ever. Milton? That just, could we take that one out of the database? That just doesn't seem like a good name. Anyways, thanks for listening to the program today. We'll see you next time. God bless.